new adventure. Was your adventure pleasant today? Come, sit with us by the fire and warm yourself on this cold night. As the flames chase away the chill, would you like to hear the tale of my journey? Very well. Make yourself comfortable, let the warmth embrace you, and listen closely to the story I am about to tell. Duel in the Valley of Blood. The valley had many names across the kingdoms, but to those who had crossed its shadowed paths, it was known simply as the Valley of Blood. Long ago, 1,000 men had perished there in a single battle, their cries echoing through the mountains, staining the soil with the memory of war. Legends claimed the valley was cursed, that those who enter its heart would hear the whispers of the dead urging them toward violence. Yet still, it became the chosen ground where disputes too great for councils or kings were settled. Not with words, but with steel, Sir Aldrich of Caerwyn rode toward this place, his horse's hooves striking sparks on the jagged stone. He was no longer young, yet the years had only hardened his resolve. His armor bore the scars of a dozen campaigns, and his eyes the weight of countless decisions between life and death. In his hand, wrapped in a leather cloth, rested a letter sealed with crimson wax. It was not a request. It was a command. He had been summoned to duel, his honor questioned, his loyalty to the crown placed in doubt. The seal belonged to none other than Lord Sereth, the warlord of the Black Peaks, a man whose ambition threatened to consume the entire realm. As the sun dipped behind the cliffs, the valley revealed itself. High walls of stone rose like jagged teeth, casting deep shadows that swallowed the land. A bitter wind carried with it the stench of iron and decay, though no bodies remained, only the memory of those who had fallen. Aldrich dismounted and walked forward, his hand brushing the hilt of the sword, Valen, a blade said to have been tempered in dragon's fire. Each step echoed across the silence, a herald of what was to come. On the opposite side of the valley, a figure appeared, clad in black steel, with a helm shaped like the head of a raven. Lord Sereth descended into the arena of stone. His movements were heavy but deliberate, the stride of a man who believed himself chosen by destiny. In his gauntlet hands, he carried a massive greatsword, its edges etched with runes that pulsed faintly in the fading light. Behind him, a small retinue of soldiers watched, though none dared step beyond the valley's threshold. Here, it was to be a contest between two men alone. Sir Aldrich! Sereth's voice thundered as he removed his helm, revealing sharp eyes filled with contempt. At last you come. You carry the king's favor like a badge, but I see only weakness in his champions. Tonight that ends. By my blade, your blood will consecrate this valley anew. Aldrich drew Valen, the silver edge glinting in the dusk. He did not waste words, for men like Sereth thrived on arrogance and boasts. Instead, he raised his blade in silent defiance, the steel singing as it cut through the air. The wind grew colder. The valley seemed to breathe, as though awakening to the promise of bloodshed. And as the two warriors stepped closer, circling like predators, the first whispers of the dead began to stir in the shadows. The duel had begun. The sound of steel striking steel shattered the silence of the valley. Aldrich met Sereth's opening strike with the full weight of Valen, the clash ringing like thunder between the cliffs. The sheer force of the warlord's blow drove him back 2 steps, his boots grinding against loose gravel. Sereth pressed forward with relentless fury, his great sword sweeping an arch wide enough to split a man in half. Aldrich, older but no less sharp, parried and sidestepped, each movement measured, conserving strength for the storm to come. Their blades became sparks of light in the dusk, each strike a question of survival. Aldrich ducked low as Sereth's sword whistled past, cleaving through a boulder behind him as though it were rotten wood. The sound echoed and dust filled the air. Sereth laughed, his voice booming, confident in the raw power of his strikes. "Do you see, knight?" Sereth roared, circling him like a predator scenting blood. "Strength is all that rules this world. Your king's laws, his councils, his fragile treaties, nothing but parchment waiting to burn. My sword will write the only law that matters." Aldrich tightened his grip on Valen. He felt the weight of years on his shoulders, but within his chest burned a fire that had not dimmed. He answered not with words, but with action. With sudden speed, he lunged, his silver blade darting like lightning. It scraped across Sereth's pauldron, tearing into black steel, but failing to pierce the flesh beneath. The warlord snarled and retaliated with a downward strike. So fierce the ground cracked at Aldrich's feet. The knight barely rolled aside in time, dust and shards exploding around him, his lungs filled with the bitter taste of iron-laden air. Rising swiftly, he planted his boots firmly, raising his sword in both hands. The valley seemed to grow darker, the whispers of the dead louder now, urging them onward, thirsting for blood. Faint shapes move at the edge of sight, phantoms of the fallen, their hollow eyes fixed upon the duel. Neither man acknowledged them, though each felt the weight of unseen witnesses pressing upon their souls. For a brief moment, the two combatants locked eyes. In Saratha's gaze was hunger, the certainty of conquest. In Aldrich's was defiance, a vow unspoken. They rushed again, the clangor of steel ringing through the valley, their shadows dancing like titans beneath the dying sun. And above them, the heavens turned crimson, as though the valley itself remembered its name. The night had fallen hard over the Valley of Blood. The duel had raged long enough that the sun had abandoned its throne, leaving only the moon to bear witness. Its pale light filtered down between the jagged cliffs, bathing the fighters in a cold, ghostly glow. Every breath Aldrich drew was heavy, his muscles screaming beneath the weight of his armor. Yet he refused to falter, for he knew that Saratha's strength was like a storm. It was violent and terrible, but storms always passed. Sarath, however, showed no signs of exhaustion. His black armor gleamed in the moonlight, and his ruined blade pulsed faintly as if it drank from the shadows themselves. He swung his sword in brutal arcs, each strike accompanied by the guttural growl of a man who fought not only for victory, but for domination. Aldrich parried, dodged, and endured, waiting, searching for the smallest flaw in his enemy's assault. At last, an opening appeared. With a deft twist, Aldrich guided Valen past the warlord's guard and scored a line of crimson across Saratha's arm. Blood splattered onto the stone. The warlord staggered a step, but instead of rage, laughter erupted from his throat. "You draw my blood, knight," Sarath bellowed, holding his wounded arm aloft. Then let the valley remember this night, as a night it chose its master. The earth shuddered. The whispers of the dead rose into wails, echoing like 1,000 voices bound in torment. From the soil itself, pale shapes clawed their way upward, phantoms of long-dead warriors, their armor rusted, their weapons broken, yet their hunger for violence undiminished. The Valley of Blood was no mere battleground. It was an altar, and Saratha's blood had awakened it. Aldrich's heart pounded. He had heard legends, but never had he believed them true. Now the valley stirred with restless spirits, and he stood in the center of it all. The ghostly form circled, watching the duel with hollow eyes, their whispering chants growing louder, urging the clash onward. Sarath advanced again, his wound ignored, his great sword cutting through the air like the scythe of death itself. Aldrich braced himself, knowing he faced not only a man, but the weight of the valley's curse. Still, he raised Valen, steady in his grip. "If the dead demand blood," he muttered under his breath, "then mine will not be the first they take." The clash resumed, fiercer than before, with the wails of the fallen rising to a crescendo that shook the very stones. The duel pressed deeper into the night. The moon's pale light turned the valley into a battlefield of shadows, where man and phantom clashed in silence broken only by the shriek of steel. Aldrich felt the air grow heavier with each strike. The valley itself seemed to close around him, as though the cliffs were leaning inward to witness the spectacle. Saratha's laughter still echoed as he swung his great sword in crushing arcs, sparks leaping each time it met Aldrich's blade. But Aldrich noticed something. Each blow that Sarath struck caused the runes on his weapon to flare brighter. And with each flare, more of the wraith-like soldiers began to take form, their hollow eyes glowing faintly as they pressed closer to the living. It was then Aldrich understood. Sarath was not simply drawing strength from his own power. The valley itself was feeding him. The blood he had spilled had awakened old sorceries, binding the dead to his will. With every clash of steel, Sarath grew stronger, while Aldrich's strength waned. The knight staggered back as a heavy strike grazed his shield, the impact rattling through his bones. Dust swirled, and in the haze he thought he saw faces. Many had known, soldiers who had once ridden beside him. Their eyes were blank, their mouths open in soundless screams. His heart clenched. Was this what awaited him if he fell here? To rise as one of Seretha's thralls, bound forever to the valley? Do you feel it, Aldrich? Seretha's voice was deep and triumphant, almost echoing with another, older resonance. The dead sing for me. They call me their lord. They know strength when they see it. Aldrich steadied his breath, forcing down despair. He tightened his grip on Valen, feeling the familiar hum of the blade in his hands. The sword was no ordinary weapon. Its edge carried the faint warmth of fire, as though embers lived within the steel. A gift from the king himself, forged in secret by masters of old. If the valley had chosen Sereth, then perhaps Valen was his answer to that curse. With a defiant cry, Aldrich charged. Sparks erupted as he struck faster than before, his blade weaving arcs of silver light that clashed against Seretha's black steel. For the first time, the warlord's confidence faltered. Aldrich pressed harder, forcing Seretha to step back, inch by inch. The wraiths howled. The air split with their cries, as though the very valley rebelled against Aldrich's defiance. But the knight's resolve burned hotter than their shadows. And in that moment, as Valen blazed against the warlord's ruined sword, the whispers of the dead changed. For just an instant, Aldrich thought he heard a different voice among them, calm, ancient, and clear, calling his name. The clash of steel rang out into the darkness, but Aldrich's focus faltered as that strange voice echoed in his mind. Unlike the wails of the restless dead, it was steady, deliberate, like the toll of a great bell beneath the earth. He staggered a step, lowering Valen slightly as the phantom words coursed through him. Aldrich, bearer of the flame, do not yield. The knight blinked, sweat mingling with dust on his brow. He had heard no living tongue, yet the words carried meaning clear as daylight. He tightened his grip on Valen, his eyes darting toward the blade. Its silver edge glimmered faintly, not from the moonlight, but from within. Sereth noticed a hesitation and pressed forward, his massive sword cleaving through the air with a roar of power. Aldrich barely deflected the blow, sparks cascading like falling stars. The warlord grinned through gritted teeth. You hear them, don't you? Sereth taunted, his voice swelling with cruel satisfaction. The valley sings, Aldrich, but your soul is weak. You cannot carry their song. The phantoms shrieked louder, their hollow voices converging into a storm of sound. Yet beneath the cacophony, the calmer voice returned. The valley is not his to command. It remembers. It remembers you. Aldrich's mind whirled. Remembers me? He had never set foot in this cursed place before, nor claimed kinship with its history. And yet, as he stood firm, staring into Seretha's burning eyes, something stirred deep within him. Flashes of visions, an army carrying banners of silver flame, a younger knight with Valen in hand, standing where Aldrich now stood, facing an enemy cloaked in shadow. The same valley, the same curse. The realization struck him like cold steel. This duel was not merely between two men. It was a repetition, a cycle born of blood and betrayal. And Valen had been forged not just as a weapon, but as a counterweight to the valley's darkness. Summoning his strength, Aldrich raised the sword high. The blade pulsed with light, faint but growing, its silver edge burning with a fire unseen for centuries. The phantoms recoiled, their hollow faces twisting as they shielded themselves from the glow. Sereth snarled, his composure cracking. No, this is my valley. He swung with renewed fury, his great sword's runes blazing as though to drown the light in shadow. Steel met steel, and the very ground shuddered beneath them. Sparks flew in torrents, illuminating the valley like lightning. The duel had ascended beyond mere strength. It was now the struggle between two legacies, one born of shadow, the other flame. And in the heart of the storm, the voice whispered again, softer now but resolute. Break the chain, Aldrich, or be bound forever. The valley trembled with every strike. Dust fell from the cliffs. Pebbles rattled down the slopes, and the voices of the dead rose into a storm that pressed against Aldrich's ears until his skull throbbed. But through the chaos, he clung to the single voice that was not screaming. It guided him, steady as a flame in the dark. Sereth swung his great sword in a brutal arc meant to cleave the night in two. Aldrich met it head-on, Valen flaring bright as it caught the blow. The impact forced him to his knees, stone cracking beneath his boots. but the light of the blade surged outward in defiance. The nearby phantoms shrieked and staggered back, their hollow bodies flickering like smoke caught in a storm. "You are wasting your strength, old man." Sereth spat, pressing down with his weapon. His black eyes glowed faintly, feeding on the rune's dark fire. No man could defy the valley. Not then, not now. Not then. The words echoed strangely in Aldrich's mind, as though Sereth himself had unwittingly confirmed the vision. This duel had been fought before. The same weapons, the same ground. A cycle that consumed every champion bold enough to challenge it. The guiding voice whispered again. Chains unseen bind flesh and spirit. His strength is borrowed, not his own. Sever it. Aldrich's eyes flicked towards Sereth's sword. The runes pulsed, feeding him, tethering him. That was a chain. If he could break it, perhaps the curse could be undone. But the great sword was massive, its power terrible, and to strike it meant lowering his guard. The knight's mind raced as his muscles strained under the crushing weight of the warlord's strength. Sparks cascaded around them like falling stars, illuminating the faces of the wraiths gathered in a wide circle. Some seemed eager for slaughter, others mournful, as though silently pleading for release. With a sudden cry, Aldrich twisted his blade, pushing Sereth off balance for a heartbeat. Instead of striking at the man, he swung Valen downward with all his might at the glowing runes. The silver flame carved into black steel, and for the first time, Sereth's laughter turned into a roar of rage. The runes screamed. They flared blindingly, then faltered, flickering like die embers. The phantoms howled as if torn apart, their forms unraveling into the night. The valley itself seemed to quake in pain. Sereth staggered back, clutching his sword, his eyes burning with hatred. "You dare," he bellowed. "You dare strike at the gift of the valley?" Aldrich raised Valen. Its light steadied despite his exhaustion. His voice was hoarse but unyielding. "This valley does not choose you, Sereth. It chains you, and I will be the one to break it." The night air grew still for an instant, as though all the valley held its breath, before erupting again into a storm of shadows and flame. The valley quaked as though Aldrich's strike had split its very heart. The runes on Sereth's greatsword sputtered, flaring wildly before dimming to a sickly glow. The phantoms that had circled him shrieked, their hollow voices tearing through the night as their forms unraveled into smoke and ash. For the first time since the duel began, the endless tide of whispers faltered and silence pressed like a blade against the throat. Sereth staggered back, his armored chest heaving, his eyes burning with fury. He looked down at his weapon as though it had betrayed him, then snapped his gaze to Aldrich. The warlord's face twisted with hatred so raw it seemed inhuman. "You think you've broken me," he growled, raising the trembling greatsword. "You've only awakened what sleeps beneath the soil." The ground split open at his feet. From the cracks poured a black mist, thick and writhing, smelling of iron and decay. It coiled around Sereth like living chains, seeping into his armor, fusing with his flesh. His figure grew monstrous, his silhouette swelling with shadow. The man became more than man, something half spirit, half steel, a creature bound to the valley's curse. Aldrich braced himself, every muscle screaming with exhaustion, but his grip on Valen never wavered. The silver flame flickered, but did not fade. He could feel the swords hum in his bones, stronger now, as if it drew strength not from him alone, but from something older, something that remembered every duel ever fought here. The guiding voice returned, louder, clearer. "Break him, and the valley breathes again. Fail, and the chains bind all who walk this ground." Sereth charged. His transformed blade struck with the force of an avalanche, sending shock waves through the valley floor. Aldrich rolled aside, sparks flying as stones shattered where he had stood. Dust and shadow clouded the air, and the duel became a blur of light against darkness, each strike louder than thunder. At times, Aldrich's vision blurred. He saw not only Sereth, but countless others, echoes of past duelists whose blood had watered this soil. Some wore crowns, others bore rags, yet all had fallen. The cycle had never broken. But now, with each clash, Aldrich sensed the chain weakening. The phantoms that had once jeered now seemed restless, torn between the shadow's call and the light of Valen. Some even drew closer, their hollow eyes softening. as though yearning for release. Sereth roared, his voice carrying the weight of both man and specter. "You cannot stop me, knight. I am the will of the valley itself." Aldrich raised his blade high, his voice breaking the silence for the first time since the duel began. "Then let the valley know my will." With that, he surged forward, striking at the monstrous warlord with all the strength left in his body. Steel and shadow collided, and the Valley of Blood shuddered beneath the weight of their clash. The valley roared like a wounded beast as Aldrich and Sereth collided once more. Sparks erupted in showers, illuminating the jagged cliffs, while waves of black mist rippled outward with every strike. The wraiths screamed, clawed at the air as though the duel tore at their very essence. Sereth's transformation was complete. His body towered over Aldrich now, wrapped in coils of shadow that pulsed like veins of molten darkness. The greatsword in his hands no longer gleamed with steel but with raw void, its runes bleeding smoke that hissed each time Valen's silver edge met it. His strikes carried the weight of stone and fire. Each swing sent tremors across the ground. Aldrich's arms ached under the endless barrage. His shield had long since splintered, leaving him with only the sword, and even that felt heavier than ever. His breath came ragged, his armor dented and cut, but the flame in Valen still burned. The guiding voice whispered at the edge of his thoughts. Steady, unyielding, hold, not for victory, for release. But Sereth was relentless. He pressed forward with the certainty of one chosen by darkness, his every blow accompanied by words twisted with venom. "Look at them, Aldrich," he bellowed, sweeping his blade toward the phantoms that circled in torment. "They hunger, they crave blood, they have always craved it. You cannot free them, you can only feed them." And indeed, the valley seemed alive with hunger. Every drop of blood that touched the soil caused the whispers to grow louder, the wraiths to lean closer. They stretched their spectral arms toward the fighters, their hollow mouths opening wider, as if each clash was a feast. Aldrich gritted his teeth, pushing back against another crushing blow, then let them starve. He pivoted, his blade arcing with sudden speed, and carved a line of silver fire across Sereth's side. The warlord roared, the shadow writhing as though scorched, but instead of weakening, the valley itself reacted. The cliffs trembled, cracks splitting the earth, and a flood of black mist poured upward like a tide, drowning the moonlight. Through the choking haze, Aldrich glimpsed visions again, not fleeting this time, but sharp, relentless. He saw the valley centuries ago, warriors of every age meeting in duels, their blood soaking into the stones. Kings, traitors, champions, all swallowed by the same curse. And always, the shadows rise and acclaim the victor, binding him to the valley, feeding the cycle. And at the center of every vision, he saw the same silver flame, his sword, Valen, a blade passed from age to age, always carried by one who resisted, always striking against the dark. Yet none before had broken the chain. The visions ended in a surge of agony as Sereth's monstrous blade slammed into Aldrich's chest plate, sending him sprawling across the ground. The knight's body screamed with pain, his lungs rattling, blood in his mouth. Sereth loomed above him, his voice booming like a funeral bell. "This is the fate of all who defy the valley. You are no different. You will feed it just as they did." The shadows coiled higher, thick and suffocating. The wraiths leaned in, their whispers a chorus of hunger. For a heartbeat, all hope seemed lost. Then Valen flickered in Aldrich's trembling grip, the flame refusing to die, and the calm voice returned, clearer than ever. "Rise, Aldrich. One more step, and the chain breaks." Aldrich forced himself upright, each breath burning like fire in his chest. His armor was cracked, his body bruised and bloodied, but the silver flame of Valen still glowed in his grasp. He planted the blade into the stone for support, using it as a pillar to rise. The wraiths hissed, recoiling at the sight, their hollow whispers twisting into cries of frustration. Sereth loomed above him, his monstrous form writhing with shadow, his eyes burning like coals. "You cannot stand against me any longer," he growled, his voice layered with echoes, half his own, half something ancient and cruel. He lifted his warped sword high, the runes blazing with black fire. "Yield to the valley, Aldrich. It has claimed every soul before you. It will claim you, but the night did not lower his gaze. Instead, he raised Valen, and the sword blazed brighter, casting silver light across the cursed valley. For the first time, the wraiths fell silent, their faces slack with something that resembled awe. The light carved through the choking mist, revealing the broken earth beneath. And then, the guiding voice filled the valley, not just Aldrich's mind, but the air itself. The chain is centuries old, born of betrayal, fed by blood. One must bear its weight or break it forever. Vision swept over Aldrich once more, but this time they were not fleeting. He saw the valley as it had once been, a thriving land, green and alive, before war came. Two brothers stood upon its soil, one crowned in light, the other in shadow. Their duel had shattered the land, and the curse had been born from the victor's pride and the vanquished rage. From that moment on, the valley demanded blood, binding victor and victim alike to its endless hunger. Aldrich staggered as the truth weighed upon him. Sereth was not simply a man consumed by ambition. He was part of the cycle, chosen by the curse itself to continue the chain. And Aldrich, like others before him, had been drawn here not by chance, but by fate. Yet the vision showed more. The silver flame, Valen, was forged from the remnants of the crown of the Brother of Light. It carried within it the last fragment of hope, passed from hand to hand, waiting for one strong enough not just to fight, but to end the curse. Sereth snarled, striking the ground with his blade, sending cracks racing outward. Do not listen to the lies of ghosts. The valley is mine, Knight. Its power is mine. His monstrous form surged forward, a whirlwind of shadow and steel. Aldrich braced himself. His body was failing, his strength nearly gone, but his spirit did not waver. He raised Valen, and the flame flared as if answering the call of destiny. If the valley demands blood, he whispered, his voice hoarse but steady, then let it take mine but no more. And with that vow, he charged into the storm, silver flame against black shadow. Their clash lighting the valley like a dawn that had long been denied. The storm of steel and shadow raged through the valley, shaking the very cliffs as Aldrich and Sereth met in a flurry of blows. Each strike was more than metal against metal. It was light against darkness, hope against despair. Sparks and fire erupted in bursts, searing the eyes of the wraiths that circled them in their silent, hungry vigil. Aldrich's body screamed with agony. His arms trembled, his chest burned, and every breath came ragged with pain. Yet Valen burned brighter with each swing, its silver flame defying the darkness. It was as if the sword itself carried him forward, its strength flowing into his failing limbs. Sereth, twisted by the valley's curse, was relentless. His monstrous blade came down like thunder, striking with the weight of mountains. "You cannot win, Aldrich," he roared, his voice echoing with 1,000 ghostly tongues. "You bleed, you falter, you fade. Yield to me, and the valley will grant you eternity." Aldrich staggered beneath the blows, his boots sliding across shattered stone. He felt his ribs crack beneath the force of one strike, his vision flashing white with pain. But as he fell to one knee, the voice returned, not faint, not distant, but ringing in his mind like a toll of destiny. "One choice remains, Knight. The valley feeds on victory and defeat. But if one would give freely, if one would bear the chain without blood, the cycle ends." The word struck deeper than Sereth's blade. Aldrich understood then what it meant. To end the curse, he could not simply slay Sereth. That had been done before, countless times, and always the victor was bound to the valley. No, this demanded something greater, a choice no warrior had ever made. He could sacrifice himself, offering not blood spilled in battle, but life surrendered willingly. By breaking the valley's hunger with his own will, he could end the chain forever. Sereth advanced, sensing his moment of triumph, his monstrous form towering above. "On your knees, Knight," he spat, shadow coiling around him like a crown. "I will carve your soul into this ground, and the valley will sing my name for all eternity." But Aldrich rose. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself to his feet, lifting Valen once more. His armor was broken, his body ruined, yet his eyes blazed with fire stronger than the silver flame itself. "I will not be your victory, Sereth," Aldrich said, his voice steady, resolute. "And I will not be this valley's prisoner." He raised the sword high, not to strike his enemy, but to drive it through his own chest. The wraith shrieked, recoiling in horror. Sarath's eyes widened with fury and disbelief, and as Valen pierced Aldrich's heart, the silver flame erupted in a blinding burst, flooding the valley with light. For the first time in centuries, the valley screamed, not with hunger, but with the sound of chains breaking. When the silver light tore through the valley of blood, the world itself seemed to tremble. Shadows writhed in agony as though they were living things being burned alive, twisting and screeching before dissolving into nothing. The wraiths scattered like ash in a gale, their forms unraveling as Aldrich's sacrifice shattered the curse's endless hunger. Sarath staggered backward, his monstrous blade falling to his hand with a scream of steel. The black crown of shadow that had wreathed his head flickered, sputtered, and collapsed into fragments of smoke. He clutched at his chest as if something vital had been ripped from him, his face contorting in both rage and terror. "No! No! This is not how it ends," he bellowed, his voice cracking as the valley's power drained from him. "You cannot rob me of victory, Aldrich. The curse was mine to command." But Aldrich did not hear him. The knight's body lay upon the shattered stone, Valen buried in his chest, its silver fire fading into a soft, radiant glow. His eyes were closed, his face calm, almost serene, as though he had finally found a peace denied to him for so long. Above, the storm that had roared across the skies for centuries broke apart. The clouds unraveled, revealing a dawn of pale gold that bathed the cliffs in blood-stained ground in gentle light. The valley, once a tomb of endless shadow, breathed as though it had awoken from a nightmare. Sarath fell to his knees, his form shrinking, the monstrous corruption peeling away until only a broken man remained. He looked upon Aldrich's still body and let out a ragged scream, not of triumph, but despair. "You fool!" he cried, tears burning through grime on his face. "You damn fool! You've stolen even my defeat." For the first time in centuries, silence claimed the valley. No wraiths whispered, no shadows stirred. The chains were broken. Yet, in the stillness, something stirred deep within the earth. Not darkness, but a low hum of release, as though the land itself exhaled after 1,000 years of suffocating bondage. Flowers began to push through the cracks of the crimson-stained soil, fragile yet defiant. And far away, beyond the cliffs, the people of the outer villages looked to the sky in wonder. The cursed storm was gone, replaced by sunlight they had not seen in generations. Hope bloomed where despair had long reigned. But the story was not finished. For though Aldrich's sacrifice had broken the curse, his spirit had not vanished. Somewhere beyond the mortal veil, his soul drifted, drawn into a place between worlds. And in that place, he was not alone. A voice, neither cruel nor kind, echoed across the void. "You have done what none before you dared, Knight. You have broken the hunger of the valley. But question remains. Shall you pass into eternal rest, or take upon yourself a final burden that even now stirs in shadow?" Aldrich opened his eyes and found himself standing in a realm of endless mist. The valley was gone. The chains were gone. And before him stood a figure cloaked in shifting light and shadow, its face hidden, its form neither man nor god. The true spirit of the valley. The mist curled like living breath around Aldrich as he stood in the in-between realm, Valen no longer in his hands, but pulsing faintly at his side like a shard of his soul. Before him, the cloaked figure of light and shadow waited in silence, its presence vast yet strangely intimate, as though the valley itself had drawn into a single form. "You are not the first to enter my chains," the voice said, resonant and layered, as though 1,000 tones spoke together. "But you are the first to break them. Why, Knight, when victory was in your grasp, did you choose the blade for yourself?" Aldrich's breath misted in the air, though the realm was neither cold nor warm. He straightened, though his body here bore no wounds. "Because I saw the truth. The valley was never hungry for conquest. It was fed by the endless cycle of blood, by pride and fear. Killing Sarath would only have bound me as it bound him. So I gave what it could not take, willing sacrifice." The figure's head tilted, and the mist shivered. And yet, the curse was not born of shadows alone. It began with men, with greed, with the spilling of blood upon sacred soil. "Do you wish to see, Aldrich, the root of the wound you have tried to heal?" Aldrich nodded. The mist parted, and visions unfolded before him. A time before the curse, when the valley was lush and alive. He saw kingdoms warring over its fertile heart, banners clashing, swords carving rivers of blood into the earth. He saw a dying king, betrayed by his brother, curse the land with his final breath. Let no man claim this valley but through death. Let every victory taste of ash. The valley itself had become the curse, not out of malice, but as a wound that festered century upon century. The figure spoke again. You have torn open that wound. Night, you may let it close, and the land will heal. If you choose rest, your soul will pass into the halls of your ancestors, and the valley will bloom again in time. But if you remain, if you bind your spirit to it, you may guide it, protect it, ensure no hand defiles again. A guardian, eternal and unseen. Aldrich felt the weight of the choice settle over him. Eternal rest or eternal duty. Peace or vigilance. He thought of the villages beyond the cliffs, of the generations who would live free of the curse because of his sacrifice. He thought, too, of Seraph, now broken, wandering the ruins of his own ambition. The cycle was ended, but temptation might return in the hearts of men. The figure stepped closer, its presence enveloping him like the valley's breath. Choose, Aldrich, rest or burden, peace or chains freely worn. Aldrich closed his eyes. His answer came not as words, but as fire in his heart. The Valley of Blood lay quiet beneath the first true dawn it had seen in centuries. The storm clouds had dispersed, leaving a pale sky streaked with sunlight that warmed the stone and soil. For the first time in generations, the earth no longer reeked of iron and sorrow. The scarred cliffs stood solemn, like witnesses finally freed from their oath of silence. Sarah staggered across the broken battlefield, his monstrous form stripped away. The shadows that had once cloaked him were gone, leaving only a man, a weary husk of the warlord he once was. His armor hung in tatters, his body frail, but his eyes burned with something that was neither rage nor triumph. It was emptiness. He fell to his knees where Aldrich's body lay, still pierced by Valen. The silver flame had faded to embers, but its glow remained, a quiet defiance against the valley's long hunger. Seraph reached toward the blade, but stopped short, his hand trembling. The memory of Aldrich's final act echoed in his mind, and for the first time, he felt the sting of shame. You won, Seraph whispered hoarsely. Not by steel, not by strength, but by surrender. A victory I could never claim. His voice cracked, the bitterness bleeding into grief. You took the burden from me and left me with nothing. For hours, Seraph remained by the fallen knight, as the valley slowly began to change. Where once the soil had been stained with endless crimson, shoots of green began to break through. The wraiths were gone, replaced by birdsong carried on the wind. Streams that had run thick with blood now glimmered clear and pure. In the villages beyond, people wept at the sight of sunlight breaking through the cursed horizon. Farmers fell to their knees in their fields. Merchants abandoned their stalls to gaze at the heavens, and children danced in the streets. The curse that had haunted their ancestors was gone, and with it, the weight of centuries. Yet not all was peace. In the silence of the valley, Seraph began to hear whispers, not of the curse, but of Aldrich. The night spirit had not vanished into the mist of death. There was a presence, faint but steady, like a guardian watching from beyond the veil. Seraph rose, weak and trembling, and spoke to the air. Is this what you chose, Aldrich? To linger when you could have rested? To watch over the very land that broke you? He laughed bitterly, though there were tears in his eyes. Perhaps that is why you were always stronger than me. Above him, the wind stirred the mist, and for the briefest moment, Seraph thought he saw a figure standing upon the cliff. A knight in broken armor, watching with calm, unyielding eyes. Then it was gone, leaving only the dawn and the whisper of freedom. The valley had been remade, but its story was not yet finished. For though Aldrich had chosen to remain, bound by duty beyond death, Seraph still lived. And a man burdened with shame and failure was as dangerous as one fueled by pride. The dawn had come, but shadows lingered in the heart of man. Seraph wandered the valley like a ghost among ruins. Though the land bloomed anew, his spirit remained bound in darkness, not by the curse, but by memory. Every step was heavy, every breath bitter. He had sought immortality through conquest, power through the valley's hunger, and yet all he had gained was a hollow taste of defeat at the hands of a knight who had chosen death over victory. At the edge of a stream that now ran clear and cold, Sereth knelt and cupped the water in his hands. He stared at his reflection, no longer monstrous, but human again, aged, gaunt, and scarred. For the first time in centuries, he saw himself not as a conqueror, but as a man, and he hated what he saw. The whispers of Aldrich's presence haunted him, sometimes in the rustle of the grass, other times in the shimmer of dawn across the cliffs. Sereth felt watched, not judged, not cursed, but remembered. It gnawed at him more deeply than any chain the valley had ever forged. In the villages beyond, word spread of the valley's liberation. Families reunited with lands they had long abandoned. Farmers prepared to till fertile soil that had lain barren for generations. Songs of hope were sung in the marketplaces. Yet with each passing day, stories grew of the two warriors whose duel had ended the curse. The noble knight who had given all, and the warlord who had fallen but not died. Sereth heard those whispers too, when he ventured near the village borders, cloaked and hidden. Children played at being Aldrich, wielding sticks like swords, striking down the Dark Lord with triumphant laughter. Merchants cursed Sereth's name as a cautionary tale. He was remembered not as a warrior, but as a villain broken by his own ambition. At night, he returned to the valley, unable to leave its bounds. He would sit beside Aldrich's grave, where Valen now rested, the blade unmovable, glowing faintly like a star. "You stole even my death," he muttered bitterly. "What am I now, Aldrich? A man without war, a shadow without chains." The wind shifted, and he thought he heard a voice, not spoken, but carried in the silence. "You are what you choose to be." Sereth clenched his fists. His whole life had been conquest, destruction, the pursuit of power. Now, stripped of those, he stood at a crossroads. He could disappear into obscurity, a broken man consumed by regret, or he could seek redemption. Though he doubted the world would ever forgive him, he rose, gazing at the dawn breaking once again over the valley. The world had changed. The curse was gone, but his story was not finished. Whether he became a wanderer seeking penance or a threat reborn, only his choice would decide. And somewhere beyond the veil, Aldrich watched, silent but vigilant, the guardian of a valley now free. The valley was no longer a wound but a scar, healing beneath the gentle hand of time. Grass spread across the once barren soil. Streams sparkled with life, and the birds sang freely where once only wraiths had wailed. Yet even in peace, the land remembered. The cliffs still bore the marks of ancient battles, and the air carried the faint echo of steel clashing in forgotten wars. And within that silence walked a presence unseen. Aldrich, though gone from mortal flesh, had chosen duty over rest. His spirit lingered in the valley, not as a ghost chained by regret, but as a guardian who had freely bound himself to the land. He could feel the heartbeat of the earth, hear the whispers of the wind, and sense the shadows that still threatened from afar. Sometimes, when villagers came to pay respects at his grave, they felt a warmth upon their shoulders, a sudden calm that stilled their grief. Others swore they saw a knight's silhouette upon the cliffs at dusk, watching over them as the sun sank. Songs began to spread in the villages, songs not of curses, but the guardian of the valley who gave his life to break the chains of blood. But Aldrich's vigil was not without trial. Though the curse was broken, darkness is not so easily banished from the hearts of men. The valley's newfound fertility drew the attention of distant lords who had once abandoned it as lost. Envoys whispered of fertile soil, rich veins of ore, and streams of silver beneath the cliffs. Already, rumors spread of armies preparing to march and claim the land once more. From beyond the veil, Aldrich felt it, greed stirring, ambition rekindling, the same forces that had first poisoned the valley centuries ago. The curse had ended, but the cycle of men's desire threatened to return. He had traded chains of shadow for chains of vigilance. Meanwhile, Sereth wandered beyond the valley's borders, cloaked in rags, a man broken but not destroyed. He carried no weapon, only memories sharper than any blade. At night, he dreamed of Aldrich, his calm eyes, his final act of sacrifice. Those dreams tormented him, yet also ignited a strange spark within. For the first time, Sereth asked himself what life meant without conquest. Could he, a man drenched in centuries of blood. Carve a path towards something resembling redemption? Though Aldrich's spirit could not speak across the veil, he felt Sereth's struggle like a ripple in the stream of fate. He watched as the man who had been his enemy drifted between ruin and rebirth. The Guardian did not interfere, for Sereth's choice, like his own, had to be freely made. But Aldrich knew one truth. The Valley story was not over. If men came with armies once more, the cycle might begin again. And if Sereth fell to his old hunger, then Aldrich's final act of sacrifice would be undone. So the knight kept his vigil in silence, bound to the valley by his own will. The dawn was brighter, the earth greener, but shadows lingered at the edge of the horizon, and Aldrich waited, for he knew the greatest duel was yet to come, not against race or curses, but against the hearts of men. Sereth's feet carried him, almost against his will, toward the outskirts of the nearest village. He had wandered for weeks, a cloaked shadow among forests and hills, but at last hunger and exhaustion drove him back to the edge of human life. The valley was reborn, yet he remained unchanged, haunted, hollow, and restless. The village lay quiet under the evening sky. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children's laughter drifted through the air, and farmers returned from their fields with baskets heavy with grain. Life had returned to the land, and with it a fragile peace. Sereth watched from the tree-line, every muscle taut with unease. He was not welcome here. He knew it. His name was a curse whispered to frighten disobedient children. His shadow a reminder of centuries of fear. Still, something in him longed to step forward. Perhaps it was a memory of Aldrich's sacrifice. Perhaps the gnawing guilt that hollowed him out each night. He wanted to speak, to admit his failure, to ask forgiveness, even if none would be given. At last, he pulled back his hood and entered the village. The reaction was immediate. Faces turned pale, eyes widened in terror, and silence fell over the square as though death itself had walked among them. Men reached for tools and pitchforks. Women gathered their children close, and whispers tore through the crowd like wildfire. It's him, the Dark Lord, the warlord of the valley. Sereth stopped at the center of the square, raising his hand slowly, showing he carried no weapon. His voice, when it came, was hoarse but steady. "I am Sereth," he said, and the name alone sent shivers through the gathering. "Once, I sought to bind the valley in blood. Once, I wore the chains of shadow. But the curse is broken, not by me, but by the night I could not defeat." The villagers murmured, anger mixing with fear. An old man spat at his feet. A young woman shouted, "Why are you here? To curse us again? To finish what you started?" Sereth lowered his head. "No, I come not as conqueror, but as penitent. I have nothing left, no army, no throne, no claim, only shame. If you would cast me out, do so. If you would kill me, I will not resist. But know this, I cannot undo the blood I have spilled. I can only choose what I am now." For a long moment, silence hung over the square. The people looked at one another, torn between vengeance and fear, mercy and hate. Then a boy stepped forward, no older than 10. He held a wooden sword in his hands, its point trembling as he raised it toward Sereth. "My father died because of you," the boy said, his voice breaking. "Why should we let you live?" Sereth sank to one knee, meeting the child's eyes. "You shouldn't," he admitted, his voice raw. "But if I live, it will not be for me. It will be because Aldrich gave me a chance I never deserved. Perhaps one day, I will find a way to honor that." The boy's wooden sword shook in his grip. He lowered it, tears burning his cheeks, and stepped back into the crowd. The villagers did not cheer. They did not forgive. But neither did they strike him down. And for Sereth, that small silence was more mercy than he had ever expected. From the distant cliffs of the valley, the unseen spirit of Aldrich watched. His heart, though no longer mortal, stirred with a strange and quiet hope. Far beyond the cliffs of the valley, where the land stretched into rolling plains and distant keeps, whispers of change spread like fire on the wind. The curse was broken, the valley of blood reborn, its soil fertile, its waters pure, its veins were glimmering with promise. For centuries, lords and kings had written the valley off as a dead place, a graveyard of ambition. Now, they spoke of it in hushed tones at their councils, greed sharpening their words. Messengers carried reports. Crops growing where none had sprouted for generations. Rivers once red now flowing clear and strong. Already, merchants dreamed of trade routes carved through its heart. Miners whispered of riches buried beneath its stone, and generals saw the valley as the key to dominion. In one great hall, a warlord's fist struck the table. The valley is free. Then it must be ours before another dares claim it. Another lord sneered. Do you forget the tales? A night and a cursed warlord still haunt those lands. The first laughed coldly. Tales do not stop armies. Steel does. Armies began to muster. Banners unfurled. Drums thundered. A storm was gathering. One not of shadows and curses, but of men and ambition. Within the valley itself, the people sensed a tension. Farmers who had only just begun to sow their fields looked anxiously to the horizon. Hunters spoke of patrols spotted on the edges of the forest. Fear, long thought buried with a curse, began to creep back into their hearts. And in the heart of the valley, Aldrich's unseen spirit felt it all. From his place beyond the veil, bound as guardian, he could taste the greed and restlessness seeping toward the land like a new poison. The chains of the curse were gone, but human hunger was as dangerous as any shadow. His vigil had not ended. It had only changed. Sereth, too, heard the rumors. Cast out from the village, he now wandered between its borders and the wild hills beyond, neither accepted nor wholly banished. When word reached him of armies stirring, a bitter smile curved his lips. So it begins again, he muttered. Always the same, men and their thirst. But unlike before, his ambition did not flare. Instead, he thought of Aldrich, of the sacrifice, the silence, the eyes that had watched him with something more than hatred. And for the first time in his life, Sereth wondered if he might stand against the tide instead of riding upon it. At dusk, villagers gathered on the cliffs, staring at the distant fires of encampments glowing against the horizon. Fear gnawed at them. Would the valley, newly reborn, become a battlefield once more? The wind shifted, and though they could not see him, Aldrich stood among them, unseen but present. His spirit watched as the people prayed for deliverance. The valley had been freed from curses. Now, it faced the greed of kings. And Aldrich knew the duel was not over. The shadows had changed shape, but the struggle for the valley's soul had only begun. Sarah sat alone upon a crumbling stone, overlooking the valley he had once sought to rule. The twilight bled red across the horizon, the color of old wars, and in the far distance he could see faint pinpricks of fire, the campfires of armies drawing nearer with every passing night. The sight stirred an ache in his bones, a ghost of the hunger that had once driven him, the call to conquest, the thrill of steel and victory. But that hunger was gone. In its place was something heavier, something that gnawed more deeply, shame and the faint flicker of resolve. He remembered the boy in the village, the wooden sword trembling in his hands. He remembered Aldrich's grave, the sword burning faintly with a light that seemed to judge and forgive all at once. And he remembered Aldrich himself, his final words, his final act, the fire in his eyes when he chose death instead of chains. For the first time, Sereth asked himself, what would it mean to live for something other than power? The villagers would never trust him. The lords gathering armies beyond the horizon would never see him as anything but a shadow of the past. Yet here he was, caught between two worlds, with the choice to turn away or to stand where no one else could. That night, Sereth walked back toward the village. Torches lit the square, and the people stiffened at the sight of him, hands reaching for tools, for stones, for anything they could use as weapons. I know what I am to you, Sereth said, raising his voice so all could hear. A murderer, a tyrant, a curse that walked in flesh. And you are right to hate me. His words hung heavy in the air. No one moved. But beyond these cliffs, armies are gathering. Men who would tear this land apart for gold, for soil, for greed. They will come, and they will not care for your fields or your children. They will burn this valley as surely as I once tried to claim it. And when they do, you will have no wall strong enough, no sword sharp enough. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some shouted curses, others spat at his feet, but no one denied his words. Sarah drew a slow breath. I cannot ask your forgiveness. I cannot undo what I have done, but I can fight. If you will not have me as ally, then let me be your shield. Cast me out when it is done. Kill me if you must. But let me stand for this valley, not as conqueror, but as penitent. The silence that followed was heavier than any blade. Faces flickered between fear, rage, and uncertainty. Then, from the back of the crowd, the same boy who had once raised a wooden sword against him stepped forward. He said nothing, only dropped the toy blade at Saratha's feet and looked up at him, his eyes fierce, as if daring him to prove his words. Sarath bent down, picked up the wooden sword, and held it as if it were steel. For the first time in his life, he bowed, not to a king, not to an enemy, but to the people, and in the unseen veil above them, Aldrich watched. The fire of his spirit glowed brighter, not in judgment, but in recognition. The warlord had chosen his path. The valley was silent before dawn, the kind of silence that feels like the earth itself is holding its breath. Mist curled between the jagged cliffs, and the faintest glow of morning edged the horizon. From the eastern ridge came the distant thunder of war drums, steady and merciless, rolling across the hills like the heartbeat of an oncoming beast. The villagers gathered in the square, clad in whatever scraps of armor they had scavenged, clutching spears and axes that had once been farm tools. Their faces bore no illusions of glory, only fear and grim resolve. Children were hidden in cellars, elders huddled in the chapel, while those still able to stand took their place beside Sarath. He walked among them in silence, no longer the towering warlord who had once commanded thousands. His armor was scarred, his cloak ragged, his sword heavy with both blood and memory. Yet in his presence, the villagers found something they did not expect. Not hope, but determination. If a man such as he would stand for this valley, then so could they when the enemy appeared upon the ridge, their banners blotting the sky with color. The ground seemed to tremble beneath their march. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, descended into the valley, armored knights, mercenaries, and lords who had come not for justice, but for plunder. To them, the village was nothing but kindling for their ambition. Sarath planted his sword in the earth and turned to the people. Today, we are not farmers. We are not outcasts. We are not the conquered. Today, we are the valley, and it will not fall while we still breathe. The first clash came like lightning. Arrows rained from the ridge, clattering against hastily built shields. The villagers braced themselves as a tide of steel surged forward, and Sarath met head-on, his blades sweeping in arcs of fury. For every strike he gave, a memory returned. The faces of those he had slain, the lives he had broken. But this time, his blade was not for conquest. It was for redemption. The battle raged for hours. Blood soaked the soil until it matched the name the valley had carried for generations. The Valley of Blood. Men screamed, steel sang, and still the villagers held. Sarath fought their front, his roar echoing across the cliffs as he cut down armored knights twice his size. He fought not like a man seeking victory, but like one who had nothing left to lose, except the chance to prove he could be more than a monster. By dusk, the enemy's advance faltered. Fires burned along the ridges, their banners torn, their numbers broken. Yet victory came at a cost. The square was littered with the fallen, and the cries of the wounded rose above the crackle of flames. Sarath stood at the heart of it all, his armor soaked in blood, not his own, his chest heaving with exhaustion. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the valley in crimson light, he sank to his knees. The boy with the wooden sword approached him, eyes wide with awe and sorrow. He placed the toy blade in Saratha's hands once more. This time, Sarath did not bow. He simply smiled, a weary, broken smile, and whispered, "The valley lives." Moments later, his body collapsed beside the sword, his breath leaving him with the wind. And high above, unseen by mortal eyes, Aldrich's spirit stood waiting, not with fire, not with judgment, but with open arms. The Valley of Blood had claimed another warrior, but this time it had given something back, redemption. Seasons passed, and the scars of the battle slowly faded into the earth. Grass grew over the graves, flowers bloomed where blood had once stained the soil, and the wind carried not the sound of war drums, but the laughter of children once more. The villagers rebuilt their homes, their walls, their lives, and though they rarely spoke of the day the valley nearly fell, they never forgot the man who had stood at their front. To some, he was a monster redeemed. To others, a warlord broken. But to all, he was a shield that turned death aside, if only for one day. On the highest ridge, where the morning sun first touched the land, they raised a cairn of stone. No name was carved upon it, for none was needed. The sword of Sereth, weathered and rusted, rested atop the mound, its edge dull, but its meaning eternal. Travelers who passed through the valley heard whispers of the place. They spoke of a people who once stood against an army with nothing but their courage, of a ghostly night seen at twilight, keeping silent watch over the fields. Some claimed the valley itself had changed, that it no longer felt cursed, that its soil grew richer, its air lighter, as though the land had finally been freed from the weight of its blood-soaked history. And in the quietest hours, when the mist lay thick and the stars burned bright, a faint glow sometimes lingered upon the cairn, a light that was not fire, but something deeper, something that spoke of forgiveness, of sacrifice, and of a promise kept. The Valley of Blood was no more. It had a new name now, spoken only in reverence, the Valley of Redemption. How was my story today? Is your body feeling warm now? If you're interested in hearing more of my stories, come back to this spot while you rest after your long journey.